Good evening, folks. I'm Bob Hiss. I'm your town moderator. Welcome to night 5 of the annual 2022 annual town meeting. I've got 7:33 p.m. The clerk informs me we have quorum, so the meeting is called back to order. If you'll remember, last night at 10:50 or 55, we declared a recess during Article 33. At that point, let me do a couple things. The clerk has tabulated today the results of the roll call vote. I'll ask the clerk to come and just announce that roll call numbers only, unless I can find it on my phone. Let me see if I can find it real quick. And then we'll resume Article 33. Yes, I think I have the roll call vote right here. Let me pull it up. There was a question that came up last night. What happens if there's a difference between the roll call vote and the poll we took last night? The roll call trumps the poll. So the answer is the motion fails by a vote of 10 yeses versus 219 noes and 13 abstentions with 48 no response. So that'll be the official roll call vote for the motion to amend Article 33. Where that takes us now is back to Article 33 as printed in your warrant. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a budget article. We've had a lot of commentary. We had, I think, 45 minutes of discussion last night on all the benefits of the budget to the schools and pro and con. I just see a couple hands. I'm hoping members can keep their comments tight on this Article 33. So with that, I only see 2 hands. I see Mr. McLean. I see Ms. Rosemary. Mr. McLean, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is Lee Michael McLean. I am a town meeting member in Precinct 10 and former chair of the Warrant Committee. To my fellow town meeting members, I thought yesterday was terribly embarrassing. The anti-diversity, anti-equity undercurrent in our town right now is sickening, and I hope we can all band together to stomp it out. To those of you who truly are concerned about the cost and the curriculum at Milton Public Schools, where is your data? Just saying that the admin is top-heavy does not make it so, and just assuming that money is wasted does not mean that a forensic audit is necessary. And just because you say taxes, 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 tax dollars does not mean that NPS is overspending. What's your basis of comparison? Come at us with numbers, not a budget reduction stunt. Many of us have already looked at the numbers, and it's clear for the amount of money that we put in, we are getting out good value. And for each one of you who thinks that there isn't enough transparency or that we're overspending, I guarantee you there are more of us that are not happy with the middle of the road per pupil spending we have going on in our town right now, and we'd like to invest more. So in summary, if you're going to bring a case to town meeting, don't waste our time with anecdotes and allegations. Bring data. Now, a few comments that I was going to make last night before all of that equity boogeyman rabbit hole that we went down. Unfortunately, the Warrant Committee is responsible for much of what happened yesterday because our warrant this year has some irresponsible comments.
Mr. McLean, watch your tone, please.
Yeah. Most egregious is the comment for Article 33. I think that this comment's really disappointing because it focuses on 3 dissenting members and it's and how that those 3 dissenting members made up the majority of the budget subcommittee. That's a disingenuous comment, or at least it reads that way without added context. Am I supposed to read that part of the comment to say that the majority of the school budget subcommittee is at odds with the rest of the warrant committee? How is that information helpful to town meeting? Indeed, the warrant committee chair rose yesterday to speak up and say that it was irrelevant if there was a minority in opposition. I agree. So why did that get printed? I would like to share a little bit of advice that I received from the late Ted Hayes when he passed the warrant committee chair gavel to me. He advised me when I rose to speak on behalf of the warrant committee or when I drafted comments for the warrant that I should never focus on the numbers involved in a vote. His message to me was that a 10-5 vote of the committee was not weaker than a 14-1 vote. A majority is a majority, and any focus on the numbers would only lessen the legitimacy of a future quote-unquote split vote. I think that that advice would be good for the current warrant committee to consider. As you heard earlier or yesterday, comments like this can be easily weaponized, as many parts of it were. Lastly, to the language in the Article 33 comment concerning the school department's strategic plan not including measurable academic goals and outcomes. This is an unfair comment without rebuttal from the schools and really out of scope for a discussion of the school budget. The warrant committee chair rose at the beginning of the town meeting to stress that the warrant committee is impartial and apolitical. I agree with that. But comments like this in Article 33 only serve to undermine that assertion. And if I were a warrant committee member today, I would not want my name associated with this comment because it reads like the author had an agenda or an axe to grind, an agenda that really belongs at a school committee meeting in a public hearing, not in a warrant comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. I see two hands. Mr. Ash, I'll come back to you. Ms. Rosemarin and then Ms. Sarah. Ms. Rosemarin, Chair of the School Committee, you recognize, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ada Rosemarin, Precinct 2, Town Meeting Member and School Committee Chair. We appreciate all the time the town meeting members spent discussing our budget last night. We know you're all tired and we are too, but this is the biggest item in the town budget and it's important because it's for our children. Where our schools go, so goes our town. We heard a lot of comments about a lack of transparency last night. Please know that we've had multiple meetings with the joint Select Board Finance Subcommittee, the Warrant Committee. Each Warrant Committee member received a binder filled with every detail of our budget. We've discussed our budget at numerous Finance Subcommittee meetings and School Committee meetings, and we had an open hearing about our budget at our School Committee meeting on April 6th. But clearly, there are town meeting members who still don't think that we're transparent enough about our budget. We plan to hold more school committee public forums in the year ahead. Superintendent Jett will likewise hold numerous public forums and coffee hours as he did this year. We'll see if we can do more to publicize these events. But please, fellow town meeting members, stay tuned and stay informed. So next year, you'll know a lot more about our budget and have a chance to ask your questions before you arrive at town meeting. Thank you, and we appreciate your affirmative vote on this article.
Thank you for your calming comments. With that, I'll go to Ms. Serio and then Mr. Keating. Ms. Serio, you're recognized.
Hi, this is Amanda Serio, Precinct 5. I appreciate all of the comments and I understand all of the work that has gone into this. I do have a question with respect to the special ed spending in the school budget, specifically around the expenses, which are they're non-salaried expenses. And it shows an increase of 15.2%. In looking deeper into the line item information that was on the school board presentation, it looks like a lot of this is going towards out of district spending. And I guess I have a bit of a comment as well as a question. Speaking as a parent whose child goes out of district and also as a person who is a special education advocate and gets calls from a lot of families within Milton, but who I don't work with, I think I'm concerned seeing the number of families that are, I guess, compelled to go out of district when we're looking at $5 million and thinking that maybe there's something moving forward that we could do to help support these families stay in district where the majority of them would like to be. And looking at the number of programs within special education that could be funded by even a fraction of this money. So I guess my question is, what are we attributing this 15% increase to? And then I guess my comment is moving forward, and my position is not unknown to a lot of people, but moving forward, if the school committee and the town could begin to look at ways to fund programs that would help keep our kids in district. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I heard in particular why the increase, and perhaps in that answer, the respondent might be able to talk about other strategies to take some of the money that's being spent out of district and put it into programs that would keep them in district. Did I get that right?
Correct. I think just looking at, you know, and I understand that that it's an ebb and flow, obviously, given the kids and the needs. And just that 15% seems like a pretty significant increase over last year. And yes, so looking to see why such a large jump is projected, but also correct with respect to my comment around what could we do, or could we consider more steps in coming years to change this number.
Understood. If okay with Chair Rosemarin, I'll recognize Superintendent Jett. Superintendent Jett, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. James Jett, Superintendent of Milton Public Schools. Thank you very much for that question. The cost that is out of district that the previous speaker was referring to is out of district tuition, but also out of district or transportation to those out of district programs. One of the things that we've done a couple of years ago, many members may remember 4 years ago, we started a BRIGHT program, Bridge for Resilient Youth in Transition. This was to help students with social emotional learning. So I do agree, building these capacities, we have a proposal to try to support the students and their needs within the district so students could stay in the district, attend the school with their peers that live in their neighborhoods. That is ultimately our goal. And so that's some of the proposals that we have on here. And if you look at it for adjustment counselors or BCBAs, behavioral specialists, to help students navigate that, we're talking about programs to support students with dyslexia, all of that. And again, I hate to use the term, those are the things that we want to build within the community, and that's the equity in the work that we're trying to do. Many of our students would love to stay in their neighborhood schools and attend school with their friends. Unfortunately, sometimes that may not be the case and they have to go out of district to various programs, and it's a tuition cost and transportation fees that are associated with that. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. I see no other hands raised. So with that, we're going to go to a vote on Article 33. If we could put up the poll, please. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. We can mute the phones. Okay. Good. The motion carries with a favorable vote of 164 yeses at 88%, 16 noes at 9%, and 7 abstentions at 4%. With that, we'll proceed to Article 34. Folks, we have only 6 to go tonight because of the consent agenda and moving Article 47 up earlier. Let me just explain what's going to go on with, pardon me, I'm on the right page. Article 34. I'm just, in interest of time, I'm going to waive the reading of Article 34. We're going to do a few things. One, I'm going to recognize Chair Asher of the Warrant Committee. He's going to explain the no recommendation you see printed in the warrant, and also a new recommendation from the Warrant Committee tonight. Next, I'm going to recognize Chair Doyle of the Select Board. He's going to recognize Mr. Zulis of the Select Board and Mr. O'Rourke of the School Building Committee. They're just going to describe the status of the project. They promised me a 15-minute presentation. Then we're going to move to discussion. During that discussion, I'm going to allow 3-minute speaking by the members and cap the entire discussion at 45 minutes, because as you'll see, this is going to be a motion to refer before the body. So it's just a procedural motion tonight, unless that is defeated. So with that, I'm going to start with Chair Asher. You're recognized. If you could explain briefly your recommendation on the Article 34.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. George Asher, Chair Warrant Committee, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6. The reason for the no recommendation on this article, Article 34, was that we voted before all of the information was available to us. The Conservation Committee had yet to meet by the time we had to produce the warrant and draft the articles for publication and send them to the printer. So there was a timing issue. The warrant committee subsequently heard, probably 2 weeks after the deadline for our draft to get to the printer, that the Conservation Committee had voted in favor of this. We had the Conservation Committee come and present to us, in addition to other presentations that we received from Home Inc. and abutters and other interested parties. The warrant committee took its vote and voted to approve this and send it to town meeting with our recommendation to approve it. And that was unfortunately after the deadline for the publication of the warrant, printing of the warrant. So that's why the no recommendation was there. But the warrant committee did vote and made recommendation to town meeting to approve.
Now, you have a new recommendation, though, so I'll just read that. Recommended that town meeting refer Article 34 back to the school building committee for further study. Does that confirm the warrant committee's approved recommendation?
The warrant committee subsequently met and voted on that and approved unanimously to send that to the town meeting. That modified our recommendation to the town meeting with our recommendation to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Rasher. Appreciate that. With that, I recognize Chair Doyle of the Select Board. Chair Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Arthur Doyle, Select Board, Precinct 7 member. The Select Board unanimously recommends the town meeting refer Article 34 back to the Select Board for further study. And at this time, Mr. Moderator, I request that Vice Chair Zulus, a Select Board liaison to the School Building Committee, and School Building Committee Chair O'Rourke be recognized.
Yes, sir. Mr. Zulus, you're recognized. And Warrant Committee Clerk, if we could put up the presentation. Off you go, Mr. Zulus.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Zulus, Precinct 3 Town Meeting member, member of the Select Board, and member of the School Building Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, let me apologize in advance for moving very quickly through this because we do have a time limit and we want to make sure we continue the swift pace of this town meeting. Slide 2, please, Lynn. Mr. Moderator, the School Building Committee thought it appropriate to describe our recent work and how we arrived at recommending a motion to refer Article 34 back for further study. I will quickly review the legal process that we've gone through, and then Sean O'Rourke, who is the chair of the committee, will review the site selection process and how the article was developed and how it is proposed to be changed. Next slide, please. The School Building Committee was established by the February 2019 February Town Meeting to solve a problem, the problem of overcrowding in our schools. The committee was charged with, quote, planning the construction, alteration, renovation, remodeling, and furnishing of school buildings. Nearly a year ago, the committee determined that the Guile Road Blue Hills Parkway site was the best and perhaps only alternative for a school building, and the committee began a process of public engagement, outreach, vetting, and review of that site, which process continues to this day. Next slide, please. The committee has also reviewed the legal process for using this property for a school. The key points are this. The committee has followed the advice and guidance of Town Council, and Town Council has worked directly with the State Environmental Affairs Office. At no time have we had any indication that we should not proceed with this project for any legal or policy reason. Indeed, we wouldn't have put forth the effort we have if we had received any such indication. What we have been advised is that the process for converting this land to use as a school building is set forth in Article 97 of the Massachusetts Constitution, and that in making their determination, the Massachusetts legislature and the governor rely on the State Environmental Affairs Office, with whom Town Council has been working for many months. Also, because there may have been a reimbursement of federal funds for the purchase of this property, out of an abundance of caution, we will also seek federal approval. Seeking that approval starts with the same local officials with whom we've been working at the State Environmental Affairs Office. According to the Congressional Research Office, federal approval of conversions of property from conservation use to build a school are not unusual, and these approvals are granted roughly 50 to 75 times per year. Now, some have suggested that even if we go through this rigorous process, this property cannot be used for school because, they suggest, according to the deed, it was supposed to be conservation land forever. That is not the case. The documents from nearly a half century ago, which show what the people involved actually did, and the law, tell a different story. Let's take a quick look at the documents. Next slide, please. First, the deed by which the town bought the property in 1978 as part of a $170,000 purchase, which is the equivalent of about $762,000 today. This is the only document we've seen that was signed by the sellers of the property, the Lamb Cisterns. I think it's important to note that there is no statement anywhere in this deed that the conservation use was intended to be perpetual, in perpetuity, or forever. Those words or concept are not in the document or in any other document we've seen, such as old town meeting votes or warrant committee reports. What the deed provides is that the Conservation Commission will control this property, and any land swap would be subject to the provisions of Article 97, which is the process that we're following. Next slide, please. Now, there are three specific restrictions in the deed. You will see in the deed that there is no time frame for these restrictions. It doesn't specify that these restrictions should be in place for 50 years or 100 years or 150 years or 200 years, which it could, but it does not. Next slide, please. According to the law, when a deed does not include a time frame, the limit is 30 years, and that has been the law since 1887. Next slide, please. Now, there is an exception to that 30-year limit if the restrictions in the deed are held by the town. That is not the case here. These were not restrictions held by the town. These were restrictions imposed on the town by the grantors for a period of 30 years. Next slide, please. Now, some have said that a self-help agreement from November 1978 is a perpetual conservation restriction. It is not. It doesn't say it's a perpetual conservation restriction, and it isn't one. Next slide, please. Just as a comparison, here's an example of a perpetual conservation restriction from 1978 held by the town, by which Mr. Eustace granted a perpetual conservation restriction to the town for certain property. That there is no such document or restriction for the Guile Road, Blue Hills Parkway property. Next slide, please. What the town of Milton committed to in the self-help agreement was that if it ever sought to convert the property, such as to use it for a school, the town would go through the Article 97 process and seek the approval of the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, which is exactly what we're doing. It doesn't say it can never be converted. In fact, it sets forth the process for converting the property. Next slide, please. What does this all mean? What it means is what I said at the beginning. We are following the advice and guidance of town council in legal matters. We're following the documents from nearly a half century ago, which show what the people involved actually did, and we're following the law. Next slide, please. Before I pass the baton to Mr. O'Rourke, let's look at one more document from 45 years ago. On December 31st, 1977, the Conservation Commission reported to the then Board of Selectmen about this property. They said, quote, "We have met and walked the land with school, housing, and planning board members so that its use will be utilized to the best interests of all concerned." Ladies and gentlemen, our predecessors determined the best interests of all concerned for 1978. At our fall town meeting, let's have the discussion and determine the best interests of all concerned for 2022. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And now if we could turn to Mr. O'Rourke.
Mr. O'Rourke of the School Building Committee, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sean O'Rourke, Precinct 8, Chair of the School Building Committee. I would like to briefly walk you through the sites considered by the School Building Committee. Lynn, if you go to the next slide, actually 2 ahead. Thank you. So as the previous speaker mentioned, the 9 members of the School Building Committee have worked extremely hard over the past 3 years to identify a proposed site for the school. Initially, our committee issued a request for proposals in order to purchase land. We had 0 responses. Further, we worked with the town to identify available parcels, and we contacted privately owned sites. It should be noted that from the 107 town parcels that we reviewed, 77 of which were under 4 acres. As you can see from our conceptual drawings, our architect updated our committee that a minimum of 6 acres would be needed for the school. Of the remaining 30 parcels in town, they were already occupied by existing facilities, with the exceptions of parcels being discussed tonight. Next slide, please. Here's the list provided by the town. As you can see, the listings below the red line are greater than 6 acres and have existing facilities such as schools, police, and parks already on them. The 2 shown in yellow are the Guile Road parcel that we'll be discussing tonight, and an additional parcel off Randolph Ave that we'll also be discussing. Next slide, please. School Building Committee decided that the Gow Road parcel became the preferred site for the proposed school. This site could work with the existing high school to leverage parking, fields, and create an educational campus. Next slide, please. The list you see before you is the community engagement the School Building Committee has performed since August of 2021. These meetings are in addition to the 3 Conservation Commission meetings, a Conservation Commission site walk of the proposed parcels, 3 Warrant Committee meetings, and a number of other meetings with the Select Board and Parks Department, all of which were open public meetings. Next slide, please. Next, I want to take a brief moment to review the data for enrollment that our committee has analyzed. Next slide, please. As you can see from this slide, enrollment within the district has grown significantly since the last school building project. The increase in enrollment has caused non-educational spaces within the schools to be cannibalized and converted to educational spaces. These include libraries, gymnasiums, art and music rooms. This has now exhausted all space within the existing schools. There is no more space. As mentioned by the previous article, modular classrooms will be forthcoming. Next slide. Similar to our enrollment growth in the schools, this slide presents the historical population of the town of Milton. As you can see, the town's population is increasing. When reviewing this slide, please note that from 1980 to 2010, 3 decades, the town grew by 1,143 people. However, in the last decade, a third of the time, our town has increased by over 1,600, many more people in a shorter time frame. Next slide. As the previous speaker alluded to, our committee has done extensive work over the past 3 years. Within the last year, the School Building Committee focused their efforts to identify a site for the school and evaluating exactly what we were building, an elementary school or a middle school. The School Building Committee studied the recommendations for a new elementary school and instead voted to construct a new upper middle school. This project would alleviate overcrowding at all levels. First, by stripping the 5th grade and the preschool out of the existing elementary schools, we free up the available class space required by a 2019 space study by DRA Architecture. Second, the proposal will have the existing Pierce Middle School house only 2 grade strands rather than the existing 3 strands, creating a number of spaces. This additional space will allow the central offices currently housed in the high school to be moved into the Pierce, thus freeing up space in the existing high school. Finally, the addition of all this additional space could alleviate some of our out-of-district expenses by moving these in district, as kind of was alluded to in the commentary right before this article. While these changes in grade configurations will introduce significant changes to the district, the school committee voted unanimously to support this proposal of grades to allow a new upper middle school. Finally, housing an upper middle school on the same location of the high school now creates an educational campus for our children. Next slide. It should be noted, the School Building Committee has only spent $12,000 of their allotted $40,000 2019 budget, the majority of which was to hire DRA Architecture to provide some conceptual studies. Next slide. What is shown here is a conceptual layout of an upper middle school for grades 7 and 8, along with the preschool wing within the first floor. This concept would be a 3-level singular structure. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to discuss our process that the previous speaker mentioned as part of his presentation in regards to Article 97. Next slide, please. The School Building Committee has identified a portion of a parcel, D656A, along Gow Road. The parcel is made up of 2 subparcels shown in yellow and blue. The portion in yellow is the planned site for the new middle school, and the remaining portion shown in blue, known as the hockey stick portion, would remain as conservation land. As our committee worked with the town for the site, we understood it to be conservation land, and working within Article 97 would be required. Knowing this, our committee has been working with town council hand in hand. It should be noted with the numerous hours of public debate in these meetings with the Conservation Commission, Select Board, and Warrant Committee, not one viable alternative has been identified. This is the correct site for this project. Next slide. As we reviewed this site, we found the exact site was the subject of an Article 97 land swap in 2001 and passed by town meeting for the construction and extension of Gow Road. Next slide. As you review the historical Google Earth images of 2001, Gow Road did not exist, and this was undeveloped land. Next slide. As you can see in the 2003 Google Earth images, the road was constructed through these parcels. Next slide. So as part of our land swap that we're doing, the school building committee is planning on converting 2 adjacent parcels on Herrick Drive, shown in blue and yellow. We're converting these to conservation land. This would unify them with the adjoining conservation parcel along the brook, shown in green. Next slide. Also, along Randolph Ave, as was previously discussed in one of the slides, the school building committee is planning on converting the middle portion of a parcel shown in yellow. It's approximately 6 acres of upland wooded area to conservation land. This would similarly unify this with the adjoining conservation land shown in green. Next slide. The unification between adjoining parcels would then lead into the Blue Hills, creating a large continuous conservation land. Next slide. And then finally, on the other side of Gow Road, the school building committee was going to convert the parks parcel shown in red into conservation land. Next slide. In summary, the project would transfer 6.8 acres out of conservation land and transfer in over 14 acres, providing a net gain to the Conservation Commission by creating more land by more than double. Next slide. As the SBC finalized these parcels, there was significant support from the town. Town committee shown. Conservation Committee, 6-1. Select Board and Parks Commissioners were unanimous, and a recommendation in support from the Warrant Committee. Next slide. Even with these votes in support, this town meeting would need to vote by a 2/3 majority to start the timeline you see before you. Please note the current completion of the construction of this project would be 2030, assuming there was a vote in favor tonight. Next slide, please.
You got about a minute, Mr. O'Rourke?
Yes, sir, wrapping up. So again, with these votes in support, I had reviewed a letter from the state forester that provided some commentary. The commentary indicated there was a way to develop this conservation land on Gow Road and maintain its ecological value. Therefore, I reached out to the gentleman and walked the site with him as a guide. Also, a few members of the community joined who will probably be speaking tonight. Next slide. As I walked the site with the state forester, he identified the area in green, approximately 300 feet of frontage along Blue Hills Parkway, as being the majority of the ecological value. As we walked the site, he described the uniqueness of this portion of the parcel with a 2-stage forest, young and old trees, and the topography that provided runoff to a potential vernal pool located on Home Inc.'s site. As we moved towards the back, towards Brooks Field, he indicated that while there was still some ecological value to this area, it was not as valuable as the portion shown in green. Further, we reviewed the portion shown in red, and similarly, it was lower ecological value. Next slide. So as I walked the site, I conceptualized what our building would look like on that site. Next slide. And then as we discussed the areas of interest along with the overlay of the conceptual design, saving these portions of the parcel requires significant work, and the construction of a school on this smaller portion of the parcel was unlikely. Next slide. So back one. Thank you. So trying to think outside the box, we understood the other side of the road had the parks land on it. And with it being a lower ecological value, we envisioned realigning Gow Road through that parks parcel, thus creating additional space. Next slide. So the space that you would see there by realigning Gow Road into the parks parcel would create an additional space on the parks land, which is shown in blue, and the remaining portion of the conservation land shown in purple, thus creating what we found to be a better site. Next slide. And then as we overlaid a conceptual level of the school on there, we found it to be a better site. One, it saved the ecological value of the conservation land, shown in green. And then two, created a larger buffer away from home Inc.'s property. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Okay, at this point, I'll just remind members where we are right now. We are discussing a motion to refer this back. It has the support of the school building committee. It has the support of the select board. It has it's the recommendation on the floor from the warrant committee. Now, rather than trying to guide what is in scope and out of scope, what I'd prefer to do is put a 3-minute limit on this. Last night, for example, during the motion to amend on the school budget, we had 18 speakers from the floor. 14 of them spoke in less than 3 minutes. And the longest we had last night was 3 minutes and 39 seconds. So I think 3 minutes is plenty of time for those to speak. When I say go, we're going to put a 45-minute counter on this. By the way, I have 4 citizens who have requested and been granted permission to speak, citizens. So you know what's going on. If you want to speak against this project overall, you're going to have another shot at that. If this motion to refer passes, we're going to stop talking about this. We won't vote on this article tonight. We'll go on to the next article, and this thing's going to come back in the future, and then you're going to get a shot to talk about what you think about this plan. Members, same to you. Now, I do have a member that does have a presentation. He's promised to keep within the 3 minutes, so I'm going to, not a member, but a citizen. So if Mr. Jackson would like to be recognized, I'll recognize Mr. Peter Jackson, and then we'll go between members and citizens calling out those who have their hands raised. So if we could start the 45-minute clock, please, Zoom admin. And Mr. Jackson, if you're there, off we go.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Peter Jackson. I live on Capon Street, which is in Precinct 2. I support sending this article back for further study because the current proposals are not consistent with the legal framework of laws, regulations, and policies that protect the parcels proposed for conversions to new uses. I'm a landscape architect, and my entire 45-year career has been centered on park, recreation, open space planning, design, construction, and management. To me, parks and open spaces are critical community infrastructure, as are roads, utilities, police, fire, schools, libraries, etc. In the 1950s and 60s, when land was sought for federal, state, and municipal facilities, missile sites, boat clubs, and fraternal organizations, the first choice was often public land. It was considered free. Massachusetts lost thousands of acres to such dispositions. Open space is never free. It's hard won and often expensive. Next slide. Next slide. In response to these losses in 1972, voters adopted Article 97, an amendment to the state constitution intended to make it much harder to convert these lands to new uses. The goal was to protect parks, open space, and the natural environment. The Article 97 requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature. It slowed land conversion, but did not stop it. Next slide, please. To strengthen land protection, the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs adopted the Article 97 land disposition policy in 1998. For municipal conversion, this policy requires review of proposed dispositions by several municipal agencies as well as EOEA before the legislature votes.
You have about a minute left, sir.
What'd you say?
You have about a minute left.
At the land property, both the park and conservation properties are protected separately by Article 97. The EOEA review requires that all options have been explored and no feasible, substantially equivalent options exist. Real estate of equal or greater value must be granted by the disposing agency, and the disposition must not be contrary to the express wishes of the persons donating or selling the land to the property. I guess I'm just going to run forward because I don't have enough time. The state self-help program, which funded a portion of it, requires action by the EOEA secretary. And if the proponent does not comply, the property reverts to the Commonwealth. Finally, the Code of Federal Regulations, which covers post-grant compliance for federally funded project, includes a review process for conversions, which requires appraisals, equal or greater land in exchange, and approval of the National Park Service.
If you could wrap up, sir.
One element, yeah.
Thank you.
One element of the federal requirements is that land currently in public ownership, including that owned by another public agency, may not be used as replacement land as part of the conversion. Referring this article for further study provides an opportunity to reset this process and develop a proposal that addresses school overcrowding and protects our valuable park and open space resources. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that, I see Mr. Palmer, Ms. Serio, and Mr. Burns. Mr. Palmer, you're recognized. I believe do you also have slides set up, Mr. Palmer? I think you do, right? If you unmute.
Okay, here I am.
We hear you. Thank you.
Tom Palmer, town meeting member, precinct 1. I'm going to talk to you about who paid for this land and how it was paid for, the 7 acres. The answer is it was state and federal taxpayers, not Milton. Here's a sign on the land suggesting a cooperative project. Next. Here's the deed from, the article of town meeting 1978. Notice the town is authorized to seek reimbursement. Next. There's the 7 acres we're talking about where a school is proposed. Also bought at that time was a 15 acres active recreation and 33 for homing down at the bottom. Next. Here's a public records request response I got from the state when I asked for documents. Next. Here's a cover sheet of the file. Next. Here's the town applying for money 3 months after the article in August 78. Next. Here's identifying the land they want and saying that the cost is $56,000, which happens to be 1/3 of the $170,000 mentioned in the article. Also, the town had appraisals at that point. Next. Here's who signed that application, all the members of the CONCOM in 1978. Note, proposed duration of project is left blank. Simply says construction will not occur. Doesn't say from now until we change our minds. Next. Here's the fruit of the application, the agreement with the state in November, several months later. The state is going to give the town $28,000, half the cost of 7.5 acres. Next. Here's the signers of that agreement, Evelyn Murphy, John Lenahan, and the CONCOM again. Next. Following month, the Lambs deed the parcel. And once again, they say the 7 acres shall stay in conservation. Next. Here's the town getting its money from the state. Here it is, July 79. They're getting that $28,000. And you note it says here, the town applied for federal reimbursement. Yes, pending. Next slide.
If you could wrap up, sir.
Here's 1980. The other part is received, the other 28,000. Next slide. There it is from the state, from the federal government. Next slide. There is another slide.
That's what we received, sir. Perhaps if you could just a closing statement.
Yeah, my conclusion is Milton didn't pay for this land. Milton persuaded state and federal taxpayers to pay for it. And in return, Milton agreed not to develop it. The problem with building on this land is Milton signed an agreement saying it would not construct anything. Yes, here we are. Acquisition of land was a partnership of the Lamb sisters, the town and state and federal conservation funding agencies. The town did not actually pay anything for the land. The money only came through because the Milton CONCOM pledged not to develop the land. And removing the landwoods from conservation, Milton is not only developing land that it promised to protect, but land that acquired gratis by pledging this protection to others. Finally, the problem with building schools or anything on this conservation land is that Milton signed an agreement with the state saying that no construction will occur on it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to alternate between members and citizens. We heard from a citizen, a member. Now, there's 3 other members, I think, citizens may be here. Mr. David Dempster, Ms. Joanne Bonner, and Mr. Ned Byer. If you would raise your hands if you wish to speak, and I'll recognize you. I see Ms. Bonner, you're recognized. You have 3 minutes, please, ma'am. If you could unmute yourself, Ms. Bonner.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. My name's Joanne Bonner. I live at 24 Cherry Blossom Way in Home Inc. I'm a lifelong Milton resident. I'm currently the vice president of the board of directors for Home Inc., so I'm speaking for the residents. We definitely agree that the article should be sent back to the state for further study. There seem to be many unanswered questions about this proposal. The status of the conservation land still seems to be questionable. The wetland delineations, the historic parkway, additional traffic hasn't even been mentioned, and the exact footprint of the project has been changing. We are in opposition to taking any of the land property. This action could erode the trust in the Milton town government and create a harmful precedent. Home Inc. is a beautiful property of 32 acres that directly abut this land. I hope some of you have viewed the proposed area and seen the close proximity to a significant number of the units on our property. There will be a substantial impact on our life here, even with the new proposal possibly moving over. Our founding fathers, along with the Lamb sisters and many town officials, worked tirelessly to create reasonable housing for Milton seniors in a quiet setting surrounded by conservation land. We are prepared to engage in assistance through legal counsel in order to protect our rights as significant abutters to maintain the quality of life we currently enjoy here at Home Inc. As Andrea Gordon recently stated, quote, "I hope the town can persevere in finding a solution to this problem that does not include the use of the land property. It will take patience, extra effort, and faith to accomplish such a challenging goal. We respectfully urge the school building committee to continue to search and find another solution to the overcrowded school conditions." Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
And also, Mr. Ned Byer is here with me, if he could be allowed to speak at this point.
If I could just go to a member, I'm trying to alternate back and forth, but I'll come right back to Mr. Byer.
Thank you.
Thank you. On members, I have Mr. Burns, Ms. Serio, Mr. Collins, and Ms. Clark. So that will go to Mr. Burns, then back to a citizen.
You probably have too much.
I know. I'm going to cut.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Brian Burns, Precinct 4. I speak in favor of moving this article back, but I do not do so resting my arguments on the Milton conservation issue. I believe those issues have been well stated to date. I think there are other concerns here with this location. I do applaud the committee, the school building committee, on their efforts. I think they have worked tirelessly, and it's a thankless job because I don't think this is an easy solution. But as it gets referred back, I hope the school building committee, the school committee, the Parks and Recreation Committee, the Conservation Commission, and the Select Board will consider issues that have not been addressed yet, including traffic. Canton Ave is impassable from 7 a.m. till 9 a.m. every morning. We have the traffic from Pierce, we have traffic from Glover, we have the traffic from the high school. We have incoming traffic from the 116 units that have been recently approved for Canton Ave. I live on the bottom of Wendell Park. The neighborhoods of Wendell Park, Elm Street, and Gulliver are inundated with cut-through traffic. And the back gate drop off to the high school at 7:50 becomes an incredible concern when you realize that you have a bus stop for Cunningham starting to stage at the very same time rushed parents are dropping their kids off. My son walked to school a lot, but in those days where he had a car and was able to drive, he'd have to leave earlier to get to school on time. The second issue I have is the Park Commission. I don't see what's in it for the Park Commission to give up valuable space that is going to be needed as the population continues to increase. I don't know if anybody's considered replacement space for that parkland. That could be very valuable. And we talk about an education campus, but that could be an incredible recreation campus as well. So I want to hear. Thank you. I'd want to hear what the Park Commission and the town's plans are for replacing that for the Parks and Recreation Department. I'd also want to understand that the School Building Committee and Home Inc. are on the same page with this. I think it's important that the abutter be represented and understood, not just heard, but understood and responded to. And then finally, I have concerns about groundwater, and I have concerns about the additional operating costs of an additional school building, not just the teachers, but the administration aspect, which is, unique to each building. So I really do recommend that this get referred back, and I recommend that the School Building Committee and the other committees think long and hard about those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I'll go back to Mr. Ned Byer, a citizen. Ms. Bonner, could you unmute? Mr. Byer, you're recognized.
My name is Edmund Byer. I live at 6 Cherry Blossom Way, Precinct 9, and I've been a resident of the town for over 70 years. Taking conservation land that is all woodland and cutting down hundreds of trees is in direct violation of the town of Milton's master plan. The plan talks about planting trees and maintaining and protecting current trees in natural areas. Taking conservation land between Gile Road and Home Inc. for this project and moving the school away from the boundary line at Home Inc. is a nice gesture by the School Building Committee. However, it appears that they still intend to take 3.5 acres of prime woodland for parking lots, etc., and call it a buffer zone next to Home Inc. The residents who live at Home Inc. do not consider a parking lot with cars coming and going at all hours of the day and evening a buffer zone. Taking conservation land in this location is the only option presented by the School Building Committee. What about other options? A logical option would be look at the building onto or above current schools in the town. Another option would be to build 2 schools, one for pre-K and one for middle school students. We have been given no choices by the School Building Committee. What are the costs and advantages and disadvantages of each option? What is the time frame involved? What are the impacts of the current proposal that's being voted on tonight? The nearest abutter to this property and the only abutter being considered is Home Inc. Home Inc. has 145 people and 98 units, all over the age of 62. And these Milton residents were under the understanding that when they moved to Home Inc., that conservation land would always surround the entire retirement community.
You've got about a minute left, sir.
Thank you. Finally, George Asher, in his opening remarks to this town meeting, mentioned common sense as an important issue to consider in the meeting. I want to talk about high risk. There are many legal hurdles that must be won if the current location is chosen going forward. Any of these hurdles, if legally lost, could spell disaster for the project. It could be an environmental problem with the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, or even the National Park Service in Washington. If any of the agencies say no or wait, it might cause this particular location to be scrapped or significantly delayed. If this were to happen, then a lot of hard work might go down the drain, but the real losers would be the kids.
If you could wrap up, sir.
In my opinion, what needs to happen this summer is to investigate these other 2 options along with the current proposal and evaluate the 3 proposals side by side at the town meeting this fall. Yes, this is a lot of work, but not to do so puts all your eggs in one basket and is very, very risky. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. With that, I'll go to the next member. Ms. Serio, you're recognized.
Hi, this is Amanda Serio, Precinct 5. I am encouraging people not to send this back for further study. In listening to the different presentations that I've been following with the School Building Committee, they've done their due diligence. They've spent a lot of time looking into multiple locations, buildings. They've reached out for other, they've done RFPs for other building sites, for land sites. They've been doing this work for 3 years. I think that some of the recommendations or proposals that previous speakers have mentioned that they look into have been looked into and have been addressed in previous meetings, including building onto existing schools, adding second buildings at current locations. We live in a town where land is at a premium. I think we've seen that as we look at developments that are coming into town. And I think that this solution is the best solution that they've found and one that works for the town. And so I just feel like sending this back for further study will push this out even further. We're already looking at a 2030 build. And it's time that I don't believe that we have. And I think that I just would encourage everyone to look at the work and really ask the questions and go look through the studies and the presentations that this committee has done, because a lot of those questions that people have asked have already been answered and looked into. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, I'll go to citizen. Is Mr. David Dempster here in the panelist section? If so, if you could raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Mr. Dempster, are you there? Nope, not there. Okay. Mr. Zulus, I see your hand is raised from the select board. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just very briefly, just to make sure there's no confusion, while we appreciate the kind words from the member who just spoke, the School Building Committee is recommending that this article be referred back for further study. The reason is that the new proposal that Mr. O'Rourke spoke about is outside of the scope of the current article. And so the current article and the proposal within the current article, we think is a less good project. We think that the new proposal, which is outside the scope of this article, is a better project. It's better for conservation interests. It's better for the abutters, including Home Inc., and it's better for all concerned. And so our recommendation, just to be clear, is, and the recommendation of all the other boards here, is to refer this back for further study so we can come back with the better proposal at a future town meeting. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. Next, I'll go Ms. Ann Murphy. I understand you're a town meeting member, I know, and you have microphone issues, but you can speak through your husband, Mr. Joseph Murphy. If you can be unmute yourself, or Mr. Murphy, we'll recognize you. Ms. Murphy, are you? There you are. Yes.
I do not wish to speak.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good. With that, we'll go to Mr. Collins, Ms. Clark, Mr. Fundling, Ms. Burns, and Mr. Mulligan. Mr. Collins, you're recognized. If you could unmute Mr. Collins. We will send in the cavalry to help with your mute button.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, we hear you, sir. Thank you.
Perfect. I was starting to introduce myself as a town meeting member, but that's not the key issue. Key issue is that I was
Mr. Collins, could you state your precinct, please?
I'm in precinct 9.
Thank you.
The key issue is I was involved in writing the original article as a member of the warrant committee in 1977. I worked with Marvin Gordon directly. I coordinated, was a co-developer with him. I am intimately familiar with the terms of the warrant article in 1977, which conflict heavily with the description that you've heard this evening. I'm going to read, quote, "The Lambs have declined to sell the 22 acres to the town unconditionally. This offer is further conditioned on the town's and Home Inc.'s agreement to preserve for conservation purposes and to maintain in reasonably good condition the open areas indicated in Plat 4, the open conservation portion of the land to be acquired by the town amounting to approximately 7 acres. In other words, exactly the parcel that we are talking about here. Home Inc., you've heard, has disagreed, and they're not in agreement with the town. They are saying basically they don't touch this land, and they say in it because this is the article that governs everything that we've talked about here tonight. I think that's a brief summary that's necessary. And secondly, the issue of what to do with it, ideally to defeat it so it doesn't come up again because of the agreements in place preserved years ago in 1977 that should govern.
Thank you, sir. With that, I see 4 other hands raised. We'll go to Ms. Jill Clark. Ma'am, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jill Clark, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, what is the impact of sending this back for further review on the timing of the overall school building committee project? Are we just talking about delaying 4 months until October, or are there other deadlines that might be missed during that period of time?
I think I'll put that question to Mr. O'Rourke of the School Building Committee. Sir, could you answer the member's question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. So yeah, essentially by delaying this from what we're seeing into the fall, we will probably miss the state legislature. My initial intent, as previous speaker, Mrs. Zulus, talked about, was to get this on the town meeting tonight for an approval, so we can aim for the next state legislature's review and vote on this. So that's my one concern. But for now, we feel this is a better way. Even with the delay that's there, this provides a better project. Again, it addresses a lot of the concerns we've heard so far. Moreover, this is more difficult. As I stated, we had a number of support going into tonight. Our committee's still working on this. We're listening to our neighbors. We're listening to concerns that are coming in. A few have noted there as far as traffic, water runoff, and stuff like that. Those are some of the additional things we'll be doing as you refer this back. We have already engaged a traffic engineer to talk with us, but we need to make sure that this was a site. I didn't want to spend money of the town without knowing that this is the site that we're going to be doing. I'll yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, sir. All right. With that, I see we have Mr. Funley and Mr. Mulligan. Mr. Funley, you're recognized, sir.
Hello, this is Jay Funling, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. I'd like to thank the School Building Committee for their work on this. It's clear they found the ideal location for a 7th and 8th grade campus, benefiting from the nearness to the high school. I'd especially like to thank Mr. Zulus for clearing up the confusion regarding the legal aspects. There have been a lot of armchair lawyers giving opinions about this, myself included. It's good to hear from the professionals who've done their work, working on what's written down and legal rather than speculation. We will consider this in the fall as a town meeting. And when we do, just like the East Milton Fire Station we approved a year ago, just like the memory care facility we approved earlier this year, I hope the town meeting considers what is best for the entire town when making their decision in the fall. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Then I see just Mr. Mulligan, and I see no other hands raised from citizens that have yet to speak. So Mr. Mulligan, you'll be our last speaker. We'll go to a vote.
Thank you very much. So I have one clarification, Mr. Moderator. Can you, I guess I'm confused. So if you vote yes for this versus we vote no, what happens? That's my first question. And then, one of the speakers talked about Mr. Asher referring to, common sense. And I think that common sense is a very important thing. Unfortunately, I think it's passed away in some ways, but it was something that my father always said, a little common sense will go a long way here. And I absolutely agree with that. But I also think that compromise is a really important factor in this. I think we all live in the town. I live on Elliott Street near Shields Park. I would tell you that backing out of my driveway some mornings between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. should be an Olympic qualifying event. It takes like steel nerves to get out of the driveway some days. So it's not just the Parkway. It's not just Canton Ave. It's not, I think we all are experiencing this as a town that is basically overrun with people who cut through. At the end of the day, I look forward to seeing this article in the fall. I think we need to do the project. I think we need to do as much as we can to work with the abutters, but at the same time, is compromise only saying no to the project? Or is there truly going to be compromise? Is there truly going to be an effort to meet halfway? Because what I see from my time in town meeting, and I recognize I haven't been here since 1977, but what I see is people are opposed to things when it's in their backyard, when it's directly impacting them. And I have to say that when the Hendry's ice cream plant got demolished, I was happy as can be. I'm pretty happy with the outcome of what the developer has done. I recognize he wasn't the most popular person when he, threatened 40B and all the other things, but I think the town did a really good job of getting a quality project out of that parcel of land. And I think that
you got about a minute left, sir.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up. And I think the town will do an outstanding job with this as well. I think that Mr. Zulus and Mr. O'Rourke deserve a lot of credit for the efforts they've made. Thank you. And I just want clarification of what we're voting on.
Yes, sir. So we are voting on a motion to refer this back to the school building committee. If you vote yes, and the yes votes win, we will stop talking about 34 tonight and we will move on to Article 39 because we had some consent agendas. If you vote no on the article to refer, then we were going to open up the article as you see it printed in the warrant on pages 40 and 41, and we are going to vote on the article as it's written here. Hope that's clear.
Thank you.
And if it goes back, dollars to donuts, it's going to come back at a future town meeting. The powers that be are telling me a special fall town meeting. So I just declared a close to the vote. I know we have a few more minutes left. I think I've got a sense of the meeting. I'd like to move this along tonight. So with that, I'm going to close the comments. Thank you for staying as best you can to the 3-minute limit. With that, if we can put up the poll, this just requires a majority vote to refer back to the school building committee. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. We could open the phones. On the phones, please signify by saying aye if you're in favor.
Aye.
Opposed, no. We can mute the phones. Okay. The motion carries with a vote of 200 in favor at 95%, 10 opposed at 5%, and 0 abstentions at 0%. With that, we'll proceed ahead on the following articles. So 35 was passed by consent agenda, as was 36, as was 37, as was 38. On 39, we have a green sheet, which is a voted change by the warrant committee prior to the reading of the article. Madam Warrant Committee Clerk, if you could put up Article 39 with the new recommendation. Recommended that the town vote to appropriate the sum of $37,381 for the purposes set forth in this article to be appropriated from funds certified by the Department of Revenue as free cash, which you can see is the amount changed from that printed in the warrant. With that, I see 2 members raising their hands, Mr. Neely, Mr. Mullen. Mr. Neely, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Rick Neely, Town Meeting Member Precinct 3. I rise in support of the recommendation to fund this liability. And I'd like to point out that this liability that the town faces is in excess of $100 million. And an unfunded liability that large is noted by the rating agencies as we go out to bid on large projects such as the new school project. I also want to remind people that the plan to reach that $100 million over the years is once we complete funding the pension plan liability, and we were getting close until the stock market changed. But the point is to use the excess funds once we complete fully funding the pension plan to address the liability in excess of $100 million. And that is the kind of plan that we've been outlining. This was made known when we were on the Town Government Study Committee, and this is something that has been made known to the town's leaders in the past. So I just want to be sure that everybody understands that this is something that needs to be addressed, and I'm in support of this, and I recommend a yes vote. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. I see no other hands raised. There was one and it dropped. So with that, in the interest of time, we'll proceed to the vote. This just requires a majority vote. We can put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you. We can mute the phones. And the motion carries with a vote of 205 yeses at 97%, 4 noes at 2%, and 2 abstentions at 1%. With that, after 39, Article 40 was approved by consent agenda, as was Article 41. That takes us to Article 42 on page 46. Recommended that the town appropriate $80,000 from funds certified by the Department of Revenue as free cash, and this is for the Affordable Housing Trust. It was submitted by the Select Board. Does anyone wish to speak to this article? I see Mr. Callahan. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Tom Callahan, Precinct 4 town meeting member and member of the Affordable Housing Trust. I wanted to just take a minute tonight to update town meeting members on the recent activities of the trust. As some are aware, there are 4 acres left of the town farm or poor farm at the end of Governor Stoughton Lane. The Affordable Housing Trust has hired a design firm to come up with a draft site plan for those 4 acres that would prioritize affordable housing. Town is working with the Massachusetts Housing Partnership to draft a request for proposals for that site. Hopefully in the coming months that we'll be making some progress on that. From our perspective, is our last chance to use to right an egregious wrong when the town sold most of the poor farm to the highest bidder. The proceeds of that sale, $5.3 million plus interest, now belong to the Governor Stoughton Trust. Our understanding is that the Governor Trust has over $5.6 million from previous funds. 5.6 in total, including some from previous funds and from the sale of town farm and the sewer easement that was required for the 23 home development that exists on the remainder of the land. The Governor Stoughton trustees, which for those new members, they are the 5 members of the select board, have received a modest request from the Affordable Housing Trust for $300,000 to help further our goals of developing affordable housing options for Milton residents. A down payment, if you will, for our efforts to develop that site and potentially other sites in town. As to the article before us tonight, on behalf of the Affordable Housing Trust, we urge a yes vote and thank the Select Board and the Warrant Committee for their support of this article. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I see no other hands raised, so why don't we proceed to a vote? This just requires a majority vote. We can put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Thank you. We can mute the phones. The motion carries with a majority. Yeses, 196 at 92%, 15 noes at 6%, and 3 abstentions at 1%. With that, we will proceed to Article 43. Recommend that the town vote to appropriate $600,000 from the PEG Access and Cable Related Fund established under Article 36 of the Annual Town Meeting, May 4, 2019, as authorized by Chapter 44, Section 53F and 3/4 of the General Laws as amended for fiscal year 2023. cable-related purposes consistent with the town's franchise agreements with Comcast and Milton, Inc. and RCN Telecom Services of Massachusetts LLC, including but not limited to support of public education with government access, cable television services, monitor compliance of the cable operator with the franchise agreement, or prepare for renewal of the franchise license and to act on anything relating thereto. Does anyone wish to speak to this article or recommendation? If we could mute the phones. I think there's one more to mute. Very good. I see no hands being raised. Very good. We'll proceed to a vote. It just requires a majority vote. All those in favor of the motion for the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. If we could unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Thank you. We can mute the phones. And the recommendation carries with a positive vote of 200 yeses at 92%, 15 noes at 6%, and 3 abstentions at 1%. We'll proceed to Article 44. Recommended that the town vote to authorize the select board to take all necessary and appropriate action to establish and maintain in accordance with the provisions. Pardon me, let me rephrase. I think I saw a typo. Recommended that the town vote to authorize the select board to take all necessary budget needed, pardon me, I'll come back and fix that. Necessary and appropriate action to establish and maintain in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 164 of the general laws and in accordance with the rules, regulations, and orders of Department of Public Utilities and the Department of Telecommunications. Pardon me, Madam Clerk? Pardon, we did 44. You're right. I am sorry. We did 44 on night 2, and we got a recorded vote. My apologies, folks. It's been a long town meeting. So with that, 45 was the consent agenda. So that will go to Article 46, which will be our last one of the night since we finished 47 the other night. This is an extensively long article. I will waive the reading. I'm not even going to look for any objections to this. So with that, I'm going to start by recommending the lead signatory on this. Actually, I think what I'll do is, no, I'm going to recommend the lead signatory, Mr. Sean Fahey. This is a citizen's petition. So Mr. Fahey, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is Sean Fahey from Precinct 9. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce this. The temporary apartment bylaw, I think, as many, if not all of the members know, has been around for an awful long time, and we have, I believe, 30 of these units in existence in town. I happen to have 3 very immediate to my home, and I have witnessed how successful 3 local friends in my neighborhood have been able to utilize it for aging parents to be with them. So I've witnessed the success, and I think it's a terrific bylaw. I chose to sign this citizens petition because I feel it improves what we have and creates flexibility and makes it more likely for people to be able to utilize the bylaw with a lesser burden. And simply, there's a handful of things that I'd like to mention, which I'm referring to.
Mr. Fahey, just a reminder, if you could also just mention your elected position in town in addition to town meeting member.
I will, Mr. Moderator. I apologize. I am an elected member of the planning board.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. First, the language is expanded to include caregivers and child care providers as those that could occupy the units, which I think is an opening that would provide even more utilization than we already have. This citizens petition also expands the footprint of the units. So it could include additions and detached garages as areas that could be utilized for this temporary apartment. It makes the termination of the unit easier and less costly. The language now requires just the removal of the stove and the refrigerator. You know, the previous language was much more burdensome and more costly. It makes the language also makes the creation of units less costly. It's not as demanding in terms of design requirements or design plans that need to be submitted. It also allows that it's easier for the new owner, if a home is sold, to apply for a new term to maintain the apartment without having to go to the Board of Appeals. They can simply apply through the building inspector. So that's also something that's, I think, a significant improvement. In the process for the renewal, because the term is 4 years and it does need to be renewed, it's an easier process. As I think most know, Alex Whiteside is the writer of this citizens petition. And I would like to do two things if I could, Mr. Moderator. I would like to ask that the Meredith Hall have an opportunity to speak with respect to the planning board. And also I would like Alex Whiteside to be recognized so that he could speak to the particulars of what he has prepared.
Well, it turns out that Mr. Whiteside is the next town meeting member in order. So I think we'll recognize Mr. Whiteside. Sir, you're recognized.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
Well, in 1992, that's when this temporary apartment bylaw was adopted by the town meeting. And it was in response to trying to make it easier for elderly homeowners to stay in their homes by having an apartment for family members, and the family members could give them assistance in their activities of daily living. Conversely, the family members might move into the home and the elderly homeowners might move into the apartment, and that would be another possibility. Or the homeowners might be younger homeowners and want to bring their parents or grandparents back to town or to town and provide an apartment and be able to have nearby assistance.
Mr. Whiteside, just briefly, could you introduce yourself and state your
Oh,
briefing,
I'm
please?
sorry. My name is Alexander Whiteside, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 9.
Thank you.
Over the years, since this has been adopted, a number of people have said that the bylaw is somewhat too stringent. One of its provisions is that the apartment has to be in an existing house, and that you can't add to it. You can't put it in the garage. You can put it on the second floor of a garage, but you can't use the garage. And in practice, what's happened is that people have had to ask for variances from this limitation because they have found that they need to add on to their homes in order to make a efficient temporary apartment. So there have been other criticisms. Right now, when you apply for a special permit, you have to name every tenant who's going to live in the apartment. And if the tenants ever change, you have to go back to the Board of Appeals and ask for an amendment of the special permit. And that's too much. These amendments, and you can see they're labeled 1 to 9, don't change the bylaw in any material way other than to allow for additions to homes and attached garages to be used for a temporary apartment. They also expand, as Mr. Fahey mentions, expand the possible tenants from family members to family members, named family members, as well as named type of family members to include caregivers for the elderly and child care providers for children of the owner occupants. So, as I say, it's a limited amendment. It doesn't make big changes, but it makes important changes. The biggest one being that you can now build in an apartment or attached garage. Number one does just that. It allows the temporary apartment to be in a addition to a house or an attached garage. Number two, adds caregivers and child care providers to be eligible tenants. And it says that the specific names of the tenants don't have to appear in the special permit. Number three, adds to the relationship of the tenants with each other to include a child care provider. Number four, modifies the current design requirements so as to allow for additions and attached garages, that requiring that the design that's submitted has to show what they're going to look like. Number five, makes clear that when these things terminate, really in most cases, all you have to do is remove the stove and the refrigerator. And as long as the temporary apartment fits in with the principal dwelling quarters, you don't have to do anything more. You don't have to take any other significant construction steps. Number six, once again, it has to do with additions and attached garages, removing various restrictions. Number seven has the provisions for termination, as Mr. Fahey mentions, on sale. A new owner doesn't have to, if a new owner wants to continue the temporary apartment, he doesn't have to go to the Board of Appeals and get a new special permit, but he can do it through communications with the building inspector. The occupancy by an owner occupant, we make clear that it has to be, they have to be residents for voting or and tax purposes or tax purposes. But they can still, they don't have to be in the apartment all year long, and absences as long as 6 months are permissible.
Mr. Whiteside, you have about 3 minutes left in your 10.
I think that I can do it.
I believe in you, sir.
Well, thank you. The renewal provision, these are 4-year permits, but and in the past, the owner had to go get a new permit every 4 years. But this says that this amendment would permit the owner to apply to the building inspector and after making various representations, get a renewal term. And the representations would be that they would comply with the special permit and that they were in compliance with it. Number 8 is housekeeping. And number 9 has to do with the definition of temporary apartment, and it's been redefined so as to include additions to houses and attached garages. The rest of the article, those are the changes, and those are the only changes that are proposed. And it, as you perhaps can tell, they're important changes, but they don't change the substance of the article. And you can see that part of the article sets out how the article would read if these amendments are made. But bear in mind that most of the stuff that is set out in how the amendment would read is already there. This is an existing bylaw, and the only changes are the changes proposed in that I've discussed.
You've got about a minute left, sir.
All right. And this is a good bylaw, and it will benefit elderly residents of the town. And I think that the town meeting should adopt it. And if they do, the town will be the winner. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that, I see a number of members wishing to speak. We'll start with Mr. Furs. You're recognized.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Brian Furs, Precinct 10. I want to thank Mr. Whiteside for his work on this article. He's spent many years writing zoning for our town, and I appreciate all of his efforts. While I don't agree with many of his positions, I appreciate all of his time. I think it's really important that the town understand how this article got to where it is tonight. After this article was submitted as an alternative, I believe, to the ADU article that was before town meeting at our last meeting, I believe in February. At that last town meeting, that both of those articles went through some public process and had hearings before the planning board. And after the last town meeting sent the ADU bylaw back for further study, the planning board then met as part of the public process and voted to also send this article back for further study at that time, so that the two articles could be reviewed together. After the most recent election, the planning board again met prior to this town meeting in its newly constituted form with its newly elected members, and then voted to support this article. And I think it's very important to note that the two new members of the planning board that voted to send this forward and approve it are the first two signatories of this submission. And I think the town meeting should give great pause to that and determine whether that is an appropriate way to move an article forward. I think that based on that alone, this article should be sent back to the planning board for due public process and further study alongside the ADU that was sent back at the last town meeting. There are probably very good parts of this article that could be looked at alongside the ADU that was sent back, which also I'm sure had very good components. And we could probably end up with a much better final product. But all of that aside, I think the biggest reason it needs to be sent back is because I must say, I believe the process was a bit dubious to get it here tonight. With that, I would like to make a motion that this article be sent back to the planning board for further study. Thank you.
Understood. We have a motion made. Is there a second? I see Ms. Rose Zaidi, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, seconds that motion. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to pause discussion on the article as you see printed, and now move to consider the motion to refer back to the planning board. You should be familiar with this. By the way, there's some questions coming in. Let me just answer a few of them. This is a citizen's petition. Which follows the process of getting proper signatures and certification by the town clerk and the select board. It's then sent to the warrant committee. The warrant committee then considers it like any other article. So that's how it got here. I'd like to impose the same limitations on this motion to refer. 3 minutes to discuss what you would like about the motion to refer, as long as we are respectful. A 45-minute count in total. So we could have the 45-minute count start up. So I see lots of hands raised. If you'd like to talk about the motion to refer, but we're not going to take any other motions now, by the way, just this one. Then I'll start recognizing them in order. So with that, I see Ms. Kathleen O'Donnell, you're recognized, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. As some people may know, I
Ma'am,
did
could you
submit
state
an
your
amendment.
precinct?
Oh, sorry, Kathleen O'Donnell, precinct 7.
Thank you.
I did submit an amendment to this article to remove the provision about family members. I believe that this motion for reconsideration and sending it back to the planning board is appropriate because I question the legality of limiting the occupancy to family members. And I think this is in a situation that should be discussed with town council, with the attorney general, and I believe it's appropriate to do a referral back to the planning board for further consideration. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, ma'am. Very succinct. With that, I see Mr. Walker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is actually a question.
The precinct again, sir.
I'm sorry. Leroy Walker, town meeting member, precinct 10.
Thank you.
This is directed to Ms. Hall as chair of the planning board. It would be helpful if Ms. Hall could outline what the type of article that the accessory dwelling unit article, what the objectives of that article were and how that compares and contrasts with this article. Are they intended to operate in tandem? Can you have one without the other? I'd be interested in hearing about the planning board's view of that. Thank you.
Just so I understand, you want to contrast by the chair between the ADU article that came up in our March special versus this citizens petition tonight?
Correct. And that was referred back to the planning board for further study. Yes.
Correct. The ADU referred back in March and this one tonight. Understood. Yes. Ms. Hall of the planning board, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you,
By the
Mr.
way,
Moderator.
a member has raised a point of order. The deal I'm trying to make with folks is 3 minutes and let folks speak because I'm finding it's very difficult for people to just keep the motion to refer. So you got your 3 minutes. As long as we're respectful, I'm just letting people go. So yes, Ms. Hall, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Meredith Hall, town meeting member, precinct 3, chairman of the planning board. The article that you have before you, the citizens article, is extremely different from the previous ADU article. The previous article where this pertains to family caregivers, caretakers, we're broadening our current temporary apartment bylaw. The previous, what was previously being submitted would be open to, it would be open market rentals that every household would be qualified if they have the right size and lot size and so forth, setbacks, typically of what you would go through a variance through the Zoning Board of Appeals. It was not necessarily a special permit process. Rather than being a special permit, it was a much broader article. So it would appeal to a more a broader sense of community, which this article is really meant to be to support our families and in an existing, our currently existing article. What is important to recognize is that the temporary apartment bylaw we already have, this is being expanded, and this can stand alone, and we certainly would need further study to look at what we were trying to put forth previously.
Thank you.
Just one follow-up, Mr. Moderator.
Yes, sir.
So the follow-up question is it the planning board's opinion that we need both, or in their view, would this article suffice?
At this time, this article would suffice. This is something that actually I would it would be wonderful if Marion McKettrick could actually speak to this. This is a current article that our citizens that we currently have and that they use and that they are currently applying for. We can look at doing something and always broaden this going forward, but we would need further study to do so. Just so the body knows, of the 100 towns studied in the 2018 Pioneer Institute white papers on accessory dwelling units, 31 of those towns have accessory dwelling units, which are for relatives, homeowners, caretakers, elderly, or qualifying low-income households. And Milton is listed as one of those. So technically, we already have, our temporary apartment bylaw is an accessory dwelling unit bylaw. And I also just wanted to mention that recently in Needham, the town held a vigorous community outreach program and decided to limit their ADU to families, much like our temporary apartment bylaw. Their bylaw was adopted in 2020.
Thank you.
Yes, and regarding the legality, if anyone has questions about our the citizens who signed this prior to becoming town meeting members, Kevin Freitag, I'm sure, would be happy to address any concerns of the body regarding that.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Furs. If we could unmute Mr. Furs, I just got a town clerk has pointed out a request on the language of your motion here. Would it be acceptable to you to remove the word back, since this didn't come from the planning board? So instead it would read, recommended that the town meeting refer Article 46 to the planning board for further study.
Yes.
Thank you. And Ms. Zaidi, if you could just put in the chat, since you were the second, if you find that change acceptable to your second. I believe that was Rose Zaidi. Yes, they have both accepted that slight wording change, which I believe is acceptable here on the floor. So with that, we'll proceed to other questions. I see Ms. Christine Hodlin, ma'am, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is Christine Hodlin, Precinct 2, town meeting member. I would ask that town meeting vote to accept Brian Furs's recommendation to refer this back to the planning board. I find it very odd that we have a zoning bylaw that has been created by citizens and not by the planning board. The planning board typically is the one that presents zoning articles and has the details and the expertise on what should be and should not be included in them. I also want to say that I am a little concerned with the limitation of who can occupy these particular things that are proposed in this article. It just seems a little bit restrictive to me, and that we are supporting our families, whatever our families means, only Milton people that are only in town, and not others that may be in need of housing, that the ADU and this particular bylaw together may be able to accommodate. And I just object as well to the previous comment by the planning board chair that if this was submitted by citizens, how can she say this was approved by the planning board? This was not presented or approved by the planning board. And in fact, the previous ADU article was what was approved by the planning board, but not ever really presented at town meeting. So for all of these reasons, I recommend that we refer this back with the other ADU bylaw for the planning board together to come forward with us with something that we can review and accept. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll just read the list here. We've got a number of speakers. Mr. McKay, Mr. Donahue, Ms. McKettrick, Mr. Chinman, Mr. Gaius, Mr. Fundling, Mr. Whiteside. I may come back to you, and I think I'll have an offline with another speaker. So Mr. McKay, you're recognized.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for recognizing me. My name is Scott McKay, and I'm also a town meeting member out of Precinct 2. The prior speaker stole sort of my thunder, but I just want to reiterate what she said. I don't feel that zoning and planning articles should be governed by citizens petition. And I suggest referring this to the planning board for its due process. I also don't support the fact that this article did not go through its due course with the planning board, and it was not vetted in any sort of a public forum where folks from the town and residents can give input on the article. I think that's setting a bad precedent moving forward for future articles. So I would suggest or recommend and support the motion to refer this to the planning board for further study. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that, I'll go to Mr. Kevin Donahue. Sir, you're recognized. If you could unmute, Mr. Donahue. Sir, I think you should be able to unmute at this point. All right, we'll come back. Next, Ms. Marion McKettrick, you're recognized, ma'am.
This is Marion McKettrick. I'm a Precinct 1 town meeting member. I actually raised my hand to speak in the original article, but I would like to speak on this motion as well.
Yes, ma'am.
I've probably been representing people with these temporary apartment bylaw applications as an attorney now for about 11 or 10 years. Probably handled 10 of these applications, and every single one of them has been for an addition requiring a variance. And every time I've appeared before the Board of Appeals, they've asked, please have the town make some modifications to this bylaw. So just speaking, so I don't see a lot of point in referring these amendments back to the planning board. This is an existing bylaw. It's not a new bylaw. The amendments that are proposed have been discussed in the context of accessory discussion earlier this year. I watched most of those hearings. This was an alternative. The planning board didn't choose to endorse it at the time, and I understand why, because they were trying to create a unitary bylaw. But it has become clear to me that the temporary apartment bylaw is a different creature from some of the other accessory bylaw characteristics that were discussed. It serves a purpose. It's needed. People are using it now, and there's really no reason why they should have to apply for variances when they want to build an addition and put a temporary apartment in it. This is tested, this bylaw, and its defects have been remedied by the proposed amendments. So I would like to go back to the article and vote on it. And I don't support sending this back for further study. I think it's been pretty exhaustively analyzed. Mr. Whiteside wrote the original article, and he's come around to the idea of amending it, which isn't always easy when you write something to begin with.
You have about a minute left, ma'am.
These are good amendments. So I would urge the body not to vote to send this back for further study. And I won't speak further on the article. I've already said my piece, but if we do have the opportunity to debate the article, I urge the town meeting members to vote for it. We need these amendments. The accessory apartment bylaw will be discussed further, and I hope we'll come up with some way of presenting that to town meeting. I'm in support of a broader opportunity as well. I see no reason why this bylaw can't exist in an amended form while that process continues. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Donahue, I see you're unmuted. You're back, sir. Mr. Donahue?
You have the wrong Donahue.
Then I apologize. I see Mr. Kevin Donahue, if that's who just spoke, your hand is raised in the window. If you perhaps could lower your hand. Or are you Mr. Kevin Donahue? There's two. Okay, if you could just lower your hand, sir, or can we lower the gentleman's hand? Looks like there's an issue. With that, I'll proceed to Mr. Chinman. Mr. Chinman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Michael Chinman, Precinct 2. I think this citizens petition has badly flawed language. And I support the motion to.
You still there, sir?
Illustrate the flaws. Let's say, I'm sorry, what?
You're breaking in and out a little bit on your mic.
I have 4 simple examples that I hope will illustrate the flaws that hopefully could be remedied if this was referred back.
Okay, thank you.
Example 1, let's say my mother is a widow and she was lucky enough late in life to meet Jim, who also his spouse died. They have a loving relationship, but they're not married. And there's many reasons why people don't get married. Could be insurance, could be taxes, could be inheritance, or it could be they just don't want to disrespect the prior spouse by getting married again. Anyway, if I want my mother and Jim to come live in my temporary apartment, this proposed bylaw says no. Milton says no to my mother and Jim because they're not married. And I mean, the days of clutching our pearls because people who are not married live together is very few of us were born when those days existed. So example 2, let's say my father is getting on years, but he doesn't need a caregiver. But it'd be nice to have somebody from the family living with him. And let's say my brother's son, my nephew, is going to be going to college in the area and needs a place to live. And it's a win-win-win. They can live in my temporary apartment. My father can live with me. My nephew can live with me, with my father in that apartment. And we can have Sunday dinners like that Tom Selleck show with the whole family. And but this bylaw says no.
You've got about a minute left, sir.
My father and my nephew is. I'm sorry, what?
You got about a minute left, sir.
My father and his grandson, according to this bylaw, cannot live together in the apartment. It makes no sense. Let's say that I have a big house in Milton with a lot of kids, and I want to build a temporary apartment with 2 caregivers because I have so many kids. I have 8 kids, let's say, 6 or 8 kids. If I want 2 caregivers to care for my kids living in this temporary apartment together, I can't do it because 2 caregivers do not bear the relationship to each other that is required by this bylaw. It doesn't make any sense to put these restrictions on it. This needs to go back.
If you could wrap up, sir.
4th example is I'm sorry?
If you could wrap up, sir.
This language is discriminatory. Not all families are the same. Not all family relationships are valued the same across all cultures. And this imposes a view of what a family is and what's important that really should not be inscribed in our laws. And I urge the body to vote this back to the planning board for further study so that this discriminatory language and nonsensical language that prevents the situations that I described from happening can be improved.
Thank you, sir. With that, we'll go to Ms. DeGaius. Ma'am, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Cheryl Tugayas, town meeting member from Precinct 9 and a member of the Planning Board. The existing temporary apartment zoning has been on the books for 30 years, as has been said, and there have been approximately 30 units built according to that temporary apartment bylaw. So that's an average of 1 per year. It has been known to have many problems for many years, but it was only after efforts to dissuade the planning board from moving forward with the ADU bylaw, and those efforts failed, that this amendment was proposed. Given the planning board's focus on the ADU bylaw and the board's interest in hearing debate at town meeting on its goals and provisions, the board did not focus attention on this petition prior to the special town meeting. In fact, the board had not discussed it since March until a hastily called meeting before the second night of this town meeting, when the substance of the article or the zoning itself was not discussed, but a new vote was taken. As we all know, the ADU bylaw did not get the light of day at the special town meeting, having been sent to the planning board for further study before it was presented by the board. The board seeks input from the Director of Planning and Community Development and the Building Commissioner on all zoning articles, and did so for both the ADU and this petition. Both indicated that this section of the zoning needs revision, but did not think that this citizen petition adequately addressed their concerns. Mr. Zawinski noted, among other things, the following issues with the underlying zoning and this amendment. It lacks a written purpose, which would allow members to evaluate whether the bylaw and the amendments are achieving its goals. It contains a special permit process that creates an uncertain and discretionary decision-making process. It restricts occupancy to family members and their caregivers, which is inherently discriminatory. And its attempt to define family in the 21st century fails. One can build a temporary apartment for a grandmother, but not a great-grandmother, for a nephew, but not a cousin. Could a foster child live in one? It's unclear. Why should zoning attempt to codify the bonds people choose to form in their lives and define what constitutes family? I would add that there is no zoning purpose to restricting occupancy to family members, not health, not safety, not density. Mr. Prondak noted that a number of provisions in this article will require additional monitoring and tracking by inspectional services.
Ma'am, if you could wrap up shortly.
To enforce and will impose a role for the health department that cannot be put into zoning.
Ma'am, could you wrap up shortly?
I will, thank you.
Thank you.
It includes redundancies and does not include standards by which the Board of Appeals would judge design requirements contained within. Clearly, there is more work to be done to improve the temporary apartment zoning. This should be referred to the Planning Board for study, where adequate time for professional, board, and public input can be considered in a public process. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I see some repeat speakers, but a new speaker includes Mr. Fundling. Mr. Fundling, you're recognized.
Hello, Jay Fundling, Town Meeting Member Precinct 3. I will briefly echo what previous members have said about implementing a sweeping zoning change that comes from a citizen's petition. And therefore, I support sending this back. We all have our strengths and weaknesses as town meeting members. One of my weaknesses is that I have no skills in evaluating the legal language of zoning codes. When we get a proposal from the planning board, I can trust it was written by our elected representatives, agreed on an open meeting, and went through the correct process for vetting in open meetings. When it comes from a citizen's petition, no matter how well-intentioned those citizens, we did not get that process. So I look forward to the planning board sending something similar back to town meeting in the fall, but for now I support sending this back. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Mr. Neely, sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Rick Neely, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. I'm opposed to sending this back to the planning board or sending it to the planning board for study. This is an article that is a standalone from the accessory dwelling unit proposals that have been presented by the planning board over the last 18 months. I've made points to the planning board over that period of time that this particular bylaw that exists today can be improved upon. This article improves it. And there are benefits as outlined by one of the members, Ms. McGettrick, about the improvements that will benefit existing town residents. So I think it's unnecessary to send this to the planning board, and the planning board can continue to do work on the other accessory dwelling unit, and the two can stand alone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that, a couple things. I do see a member of the warrant committee that is asking for permission to speak. That's an elected town meeting member. It is my policy to not recognize elected town meeting members who are members of the warrant committee. I believe by long tradition, we discourage that. I've talked to the member about it, and I'm choosing not to recognize them to speak tonight without identifying. There's only 3 speakers left. Is anyone who is yet to speak on this motion to refer wish to speak? Otherwise, I'm going to go to just 4 names and go to a vote. I'm going to call Mr. Whiteside, Ms. O'Donnell, Mr. Fahey, Mr. Furs. Then we're going to go to the warrant committee for their opinion on this motion to refer. So with that, Mr. Whiteside, you're recognized. Pardon me, Ms. Agostino, you just raised your hand in the nick of time. Ms. Agostino, you're recognized. If you could unmute, ma'am, Ms. Agostino. There you are.
I am muted again. Am I here? All right.
Yes, you are. Yes.
Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9, town meeting member. I strongly feel that there is a process where citizens can submit amendments to zoning bylaws, and in the past they have. So we should take anyone's time and effort to improve something, which I have a lot of respect for the many years served by the town meeting member representing individuals at the planning board. I know it's a difficult job, and if this article has submitted will make it easier, it's not the end all. The planning board will continue over many years, I'm sure, to fine tune this article, review all the needs for different family members, et cetera, et cetera. But if there are portions of this bylaw that we have had professionals who have lawyers that have dealt with these type of things say that they also support adding this language to help out temporarily until the planning board, makes their changes, which hopefully will be at the next town meeting, then we should respect the process. I also will note that I don't recall any bylaw, article, regulation that would not allow an elected town meeting member, no matter what position they're in, especially if it's on the warrant committee, because it did happen to me when I was on the warrant committee. And it turned out that the 4 years that I submitted an article, the Department of Revenue finally said we weren't doing it legally, so they passed it. So
you have about a minute left, ma'am.
So my question is, what bylaw, regulation, it might be something that the moderator feels he must do, but in the past, warrant committee members have presented, and if you can cite something else, he or she, or they is an elected official. So I will be supporting passage and not the motion to refer to the planning board. And if one more person says refer back, it wouldn't be back. The planning board will proceed. So thank you very much for answering the important question of denying an elected official the right to speak.
Happy to do that. I cite town meeting time, which is littered with the phrase, no one may speak without the leave of the moderator. It is my opinion that I'll refer to myself as the elected head of the legislative branch at town, in town. And our bylaws call for that individual to name a committee of citizens who are going to then do the heavy lifting of looking through the warrant such that they can make informed recommendations to the town meeting members. They meet extensively, as Chair Asher has discussed. They debate, they vote, and when they conclude, it is my belief that they have had a chance to say their piece and they have fulfilled their duties. And so I've talked to members that I will not be recognizing you during your term on the warrant committee as long as I am the moderator. And it's a policy that I'm within my rights and purview to implement. So I'm trying to implement it fairly. I had a member that broke that rule. That member is no longer serving on the warrant committee. So it's my call, Ms. Agostino.
So as a follow-up, I will just point out once again that articles I personally submitted as a member were presented because they were the law. They were required by law. And I think this matter will be taken up for further review. Thank you for voicing your opinion.
Thank you, ma'am. Zoom admin, how much time is left on our 45-minute counter? 15 minutes? 13 minutes. We have 5 people. You can just make it. I do see some new members. I'm going to recognize Mr. Hardy and then Mr. Mahalchik. Mr. Hardy, you're recognized.
Hi, Kevin Hardy. I mean, Precinct 1. I feel like the last few nights we've talked about the school committee ad nauseum and the transparency people are seeking and the amount of meetings they've had around the budget. I support sending this to the planning board to seek that same transparency. It feels like this really hasn't gone through the process that it needs to go through, and so I support sending it to the planning board.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Mahalchik.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Mahalchik, Precinct 7, Town Meeting Member. I think that you should try to make laws that last for more than a few months. And also, there's a certain amount of efficiency in deciding an issue and having it settled by compromise if necessary. I think there are 2 teams in this town, and there's been a close division between the accessory dwelling unit proposal and this proposal. There is something in the middle between those proposals that we should enact and we should live with for 30 more years. So I want to vote yes on this proposal to get something that's better for everybody, take the time and run it through the process. I don't want to legislate by citizens petition. Thanks.
Thank you. I now see some of the repeat speakers. Folks, I'm going to hold you, since it's a repeat, to 2 minutes so you can all get some time in. So we'll start with Mr. Whiteside. Sir, you have 2 minutes.
Well, just initially, I was on the planning board for 32 years and wrote most of the zoning during that 32 years. And this article has had a planning board hearing, just like any other zoning article, and no questions were asked about the substantive provisions. And if this is illegal, which I don't believe for a second it is, but if it is illegal, this article, if it's passed, has to go to the Attorney General for approval. And if it's illegal, the Attorney General won't approve it. And that's the way to get a determination of the legality. So send it to the Attorney General and see what he says. As far as sending it back, there already temporary signs was sent back 5 years ago. Hasn't come back yet, but it was referred back to the planning board. If you send it back, you're not guaranteed that you're going to get it returned to the town meeting anytime soon. Traffic impact mitigation. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it was returned to the planning board for further work. Hasn't come back. So the idea that you send it to the planning board and somehow it's going to come back in the fall, it's possible. It's also not possible. You have a chance. You have a chance to do something good for the town now. And I think that the town should seize it. The town meeting should seize it. And
thank you, sir. If you could wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll go to Ms. O'Donnell. Ma'am, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just want to briefly say that at the special town meeting, where the accessory dwelling unit article never came up for discussion, we discussed for many hours, just letting it out to the town meeting, that I was promised at that time that we would work together in the future for an amendment to the zoning bylaw that would merge the accessory dwelling unit and the temporary apartment dwelling unit bylaw. And while I agree with Mr. Whiteside that his amendments are an improvement to a pretty terrible bylaw as it stands, I would also focus our attention on the fact that we were promised at the last meeting that there would be some work going ahead to compromise those two ideas to come up with one bylaw. And I asked the town meeting to refer to the planning board for that process. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, Mr. Fahey, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sean Fahey, Precinct 9 and Planning Board member. I will also try to be brief, Mr. Moderator. Alex Whiteside spoke a moment ago and he said we have a chance to serve the residents. I would view it a little differently. We have an obligation to serve the residents. An obligation. This is an improvement for every resident in town. And if we do not pass this because we have differences of opinion of it not being as inclusive of language, yes, we may wait a period of time before it returns. And yes, there will be residents in the town that could benefit from the citizens petition that will not be able to benefit from the citizens petition. I see no good reason for this not to pass. This should be passed because we have an obligation to the citizens. The speaker earlier referred to this as sweeping zoning change, not even close. That is an incorrect reference to the language that Alex Whiteside has written. I'm confident that residents throughout the town will want this citizens petition passed. No one is harmed by it. Many people can benefit by it. And if we do not pass this, I think the town meeting will be viewed as standing in the way of good progress. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Lastly, I see Mr. By the way, how much time we have left now? 6 minutes. Some hands dropped. And Mr. Baylor, a first-time speaker. Mr. Baylor, you're recognized.
Sorry about that. Try to find unmute. Yes, thank you. I don't want to belabor it. I just want to put out there.
Mr. Baylor, could you just identify yourself for the?
Oh, sorry, Richard Baylor. Sorry, first-time speaker. Precinct 7, member of the planning board. I'm in my 5th year of the planning board. I spent about 6 years on the warrant committee. And I just want to put forward to the body, I agree with the past comments that Cheryl made and some others made. My worry is this, we had an ADU bylaw come forward and there was a number of issues that were brought up, which passed and sent it back to the planning board, but we haven't, some of those same issues are in this one. And so I do worry the fact that we really had no public process here, that folks don't actually know what's in it or what the ramifications are. Again, I spent 5 years, in my 5th year of the planning board, 6 years on the warrant committee. And of that time, I've never once seen a board or a committee actually put forward an article that didn't actually have a public process. And this, to one of the points made, I think, Mr. Whiteside, it did have an open public hearing, but it was quickly stalled and stopped for the ADU. And it was put aside, as member Kathleen O'Donnell has mentioned. And so I worry that we're rushing something through without a public process. And I really don't see what harm it's going to be to actually allow us on the planning board to bring this forward to a public hearing and let folks come in and talk about it and put something better in front of town meeting, or at least, as somebody else had mentioned, something that you're assured the planning board has actually looked through. We did have a recent vote on this to change the vote. And the reality is, half the board is brand new. And so I think a public process is due here.
Thank you, sir. With that, I'll go to Mr. Furs, and I'm going to go to the warrant committee for their opinion on this motion to refer. Mr. Furs, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Brian Furs, Precinct 10. 1938, I believe that was the year our zoning was put in place. That's 84 years ago. Zoning is long. It lasts a long time. It is what governs how we develop our town, and it's something that deserves great debate. And anybody that's been on this town meeting for more than a couple of years knows that great debate on zoning is what we specialize in. This article has not been studied. It needs to go to the planning board for study. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Asher, would you raise your hand when the warrant committee has an opinion on this motion to refer? In Zoom admin, I think we're about out of time, right? Yes, we are. Thank you, folks, for abiding by the 3 minutes, the 2 minutes, and the 45 minutes. Chair Asher, you're recognized, sir.
Mr. Moderator, thank you. George Asher, Chair Warrant Committee, Precinct 6 Town Meeting Member. The Warrant Committee is in favor of referring this to the Planning Board.
Thank you, sir. Very clear. With that, we'll go to a vote. Let me describe again, motion to refer. It just requires a majority. It's a process vote. If the motion fails, we will, if the motion succeeds, we will conclude for the night. If the motion fails, we will return back to discuss the merits of the article and the recommendation. So with that, if everyone is clear, can we put up the polls? All in favor of this motion to refer? Before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Thank you. We can mute. With that, the motion carries with a vote of 140 yeses at 65%, 75 noes at 34%, and 1 abstain at 0%. That concludes the articles we have for tonight. Just before we get the motion to dissolve, I'll check the room. Madam Clerk, will you agree we are all wrapped up for the night? Yes, and for annual town meeting. The first thing I'd like to do is thank the Warrant Committee, who, as members who have served, as citizens who observe, know that this committee does put in hours after hours after hours. They have been highly visible. They've received praise and criticism. Criticism comes with the game. I hope people will be respectful of the work they put in and the honest thought and guidance they try to give us all in these recommendations. So Chair Asher, on behalf of town meeting, thank you very much. I wish we could all be in person and we'd give you a standing ovation. I'd also like to note Ms. Lynn Hoy. Ms. Hoy has been the Warrant Committee clerk for the past 5 years. When you see the magic happen of your amendments appear and your presentations show up, and she's the person clicking next slide, next slide. So Ms. Hoy, thank you. She's extremely responsive to this moderator's requests, and I'm very grateful for her work. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll entertain in the Q&A a motion to dissolve. I see so moved by Mr. Walsh. I see seconded by Mr. Matthews. If we could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion to dissolve, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstaining. On the phones, in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you. With that, the motion to dissolve carries with a vote of 198 yeses at 98%, 2 noes at 1%, and 2 abstains at 1%. Ladies and gentlemen, we are dissolved. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your short evening.